Hi, I'm Anthony NEWBOLD. Welcome to A Closer Look. My guest this week is the chairman of Bahamas Power and Light, Dr. Donovan Moxey. Mr. Chairman, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Mr. NEWBOLD. It's good to be here. Appreciate it.
We certainly some ways from when we first met. I mean, I wasn't hosting a show. You weren't on the hot seat at BPL.
That's correct.
Has it begun to settle down just a little bit at BPL?
Actually, yes, it has. Of course, everyone knows that we went through a very trying time this past summer with the load shedding. And we managed to essentially transition out to that by the end of November of last year. And so what we've been able to do then is to open up Station A. So we have additional generation assets. And now we're able to really focus on executing our strategic plan. And so now we have the ability to execute.
Talking about generation, you have said since December of, and I'm thinking last year, it's not last year,
right.
It's December of 2018, that you, BPL, going to be getting out of generation. Exactly what do you mean by that?
Yes, that's correct. So one of the things that we did as a board when we came in is we put together a strategic plan, but that strategic plan had to do with analyzing where we were as an organization, as a utility, but then looking at best practices worldwide in terms of what utilities are doing around the world in order to be a lot more efficient in providing services to their constituents. And so one of the things we see is that most of those utilities aren't primarily in the generation business. They actually are in transmission, distribution, customer service, and they tend to buy their power wholesale from providers. And so as BPL, recognizing historically that we have not done a very good job in terms of maintaining our generation assets, in terms of the costs for generating power, having that as low as possible, strategically, in order to provide stable power, it's very important for us to have generation essentially be done by another entity who has that as their sole focus.
You talked about assets just now.
Correct.
One of the accusations, if you will, has been that BPL is about to or is giving away its assets. What's your response to that?
That's actually not correct. Now let me step back and talk about generation or getting out of the generation business. What we're doing at BPL is we're essentially providing, the provider of our baseload generation will be a third-party entity. And so what do I mean by that? As a island of New Providence, the average power we require is about 180 megawatts per year on average. Now you have peaks in the summertime, you have troughs in the wintertime, but on average is around 180 megawatts. And if you take that 180 megawatts and then you consider a level of redundancy in that, which is normally about 3 additional engines, or what we call N-3, and when you assume that an engine is 20 megawatts, you're now looking at having 1, 2, possibly 3 additional engines available to you. So what we're doing at BPL is we are engaging Shell North America to provide the baseload generation. However, for peaking and additional redundancy, BPL will still own assets at Clifton Pier, still own assets at Blue Hills, and BPL will own all of its assets in all of the Family Islands. What we're looking at here is New Providence being our biggest cost center, actually having the base load being provided by a third party.
I'm going to talk to you about Shell in a little bit, but what's next now? You addressing this whole generation situation. What comes next?
What comes next for us is really focusing also on transmission and distribution. Obviously, from a generation strategy perspective, we've built Station A, we're going to build Station D. There's the Shell deal, which we'll get into later. But we want the public and everybody to recognize that in addition to having very, very trying and challenging situations with our generation assets, the same also exists for a lot of our transmission and distribution assets. And so what we're doing now is we're looking at all of our substations, we're looking at our transmission grid, and we're shoring up those particular parts of our network as well.
Talking about the transmission grid and all the other transmission points that you have, we think of Nassau mostly.
Right.
Is BPL only focusing on Nassau, what they call Nassau-centric?
No, not at all. I think what everybody needs to appreciate is Bahamas Power and Light has 29 power plants over about 19 different islands in this country, and we're responsible for all of that. In fact, we're responsible for providing 85% of the electricity in the entire country. And so as a board, when we talk about developing this strategy, it's a Bahamas-centric strategy. And we have to recognize that the next significant economic growth for this country is going to come from the Family Islands. So you have to have sufficient generation in order to support the projects like the Disneys of the world, support other expansions that we see coming in the other family islands. And so as BPL, you have to plan for the long term. And so when you talk about making investments in transmission distribution, in generation, in making a smarter grid so that we have a centralized management and control system, those are the kinds of investments that we need to make for the future.
Recently, you said that you lost the trust of your customers. What are you doing about it?
Where we are is we recognize that customer service and really paying attention to the needs of the customers is paramount for anybody in the service industry. And so when you think about all of people's experiences with BPL in terms of the power going off, in terms of not being responsive to their calls, in terms of not certainly keeping up to our end of the bargain over the years, and I'm talking about prior to even my administration as member of the board, there's a certain level of trust that's been lost. In fact, we've done some brand identity studies, and the responses that have come back in terms of how people view BPL is very negative. So clearly we have a hole to climb out of. And one of the things that's very important is you have to recognize and you have to take ownership of where you are and then put forth plans in which to correct those situations. And that's what we're doing.
Will training, excessive training, across the board be a part of what you're going to do?
Yes, without question. So where we see training is in a number of different areas. First is customer-facing training. So not only the customer service representatives, but any BPL employee whose job function puts them in front of customers, we're going to train them on how to deal with and interact with those customers. When you look at customer service, we now are having plans to put in a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week call center, so that when customers call in, that people will answer. Exactly. Now, one of the things you have to recognize, and in modern call centers, there's what they call a call tree or call progression, where you enter into an automatic voice response system, and then based on your needs, you get routed to the appropriate live person. Because nowadays, with making a smart grid, there are certain things that customers can indicate electronically, and we can take care of automatically. We're going to build those systems as well. But in those cases where a customer wants to speak to a live person, we will route them to a live person and be very responsive to their needs.
You talked about preparations for next summer. That's one of the things you've talked about. You got a new power station in the fleet. You got the new 30-plus megawatt engine Blue Hills. What about the engines at Clifton Pier?
The engines at Clifton Pier have all been fully tested. We rotate them onto the grid because we have to have a staggered maintenance schedule. And so from our perspective, we're well on the way to be very well prepared from a generation asset perspective for the summer. One of the lessons we learned last summer, we went into the summer prepared to have 3 additional generators available for peak demand. It turns out that we lost 3 generators within 3-4 weeks of the start of the summer, which put us into the load shedding issue. Well, this summer, we have plans to have 6 additional generation assets available for the summer. And so we're doing all the preparations we can, balancing cost with availability. And so we believe very, very strongly that given the preparations we're doing with our winter maintenance program, given the full availability of Station A in what we're doing, given the fact that we're still using rentals, but we're going from 110 megawatts down to about 40 megawatts of rentals, thereby saving costs, we will have more than enough generators available to take us through the summer.
I'm going to ask you some more about that, but we got to take a break.
Okay.
And we'll be back with the chairman of BPL, Dr. Donovan Moxey, after this.